Commander Jake Morrison pressed his face against the thick glass window of the spaceship's bridge. Stars filled the darkness in every direction, countless points of light scattered across the black void. He had been staring at this same view for 3 hours, but the sight never got old. Somewhere out there, beyond those distant suns, lay the answers to questions that had puzzled humanity for over 200 years. The research vessel Neptune's Dawn moved silently through space, its engines humming with a low vibration that Jake could feel through the metal floor. This was humanity's most advanced exploration ship, equipped with sensors that could detect signs of life from dozens of light years away. Yet after 6 months of searching the outer rim of the galaxy, they had found nothing but empty worlds and silent space. Dr. Lisa Carter walked up beside him, holding a steaming cup of coffee in both hands. Her short brown hair was messy from working long hours in the lab, and her green eyes looked tired. She was the ship's lead scientist, responsible for analyzing every piece of data they collected from the worlds they visited. Still no luck with the long-range scans, she said, taking a sip of her coffee. We've checked 47 star systems in the past month. Some of them have planets that could support life, but there's no sign that anyone has ever lived there. Jake turned away from the window to look at her. What about radio signals? Any kind of electronic noise that might suggest civilization? Lisa shook her head. Nothing. The galaxy is completely quiet. It's like we're the only ones who ever figured out how to build radios or spaceships. This was the mystery that had brought them so far from Earth. When humans first developed faster-than-light travel, everyone expected to find a galaxy full of alien civilizations. Scientists had calculated that there should be thousands of intelligent species in the Milky Way. The galaxy was old enough and big enough to support countless worlds where life could evolve and grow into something capable of building cities and exploring space. But after 2 centuries of exploration, humanity had found nothing. They had established colonies on hundreds of worlds, built space stations around distant stars, and sent robot probes to every corner of the galaxy they could reach. The result was always the same: beautiful planets, complex ecosystems full of plants and animals, but no signs of intelligence beyond what humans had brought with them. Lieutenant Chris Walker looked up from his control station, where multiple screens showed data streaming in from the ship's sensors. He was young, maybe 25 years old, with sandy hair and bright blue eyes that reminded Jake of his own son back on Earth. Chris had joined the deep space exploration program straight out of the academy, eager to be part of humanity's greatest adventure. "Commander, I'm picking up something interesting about 30 light years from here," Chris said, his voice filled with excitement. "There's a star system with at least 6 planets, and 3 of them are in the zone where liquid water could exist." Captain Amy Foster entered the bridge just as Chris was speaking. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she had the kind of presence that made everyone stand a little straighter when she walked into a room. Amy had been exploring deep space for over 20 years, and she had seen more empty worlds than anyone else in the fleet. "Are we talking about another dead system, or do you have something that might actually be worth our time?" Amy asked, settling into the captain's chair at the center of the bridge. Chris's fingers moved quickly across his controls, bringing up a detailed display on the main screen. The spectral analysis shows one planet with an oxygen-rich atmosphere and large bodies of water. The plant life is producing the right kind of chemical signatures that we'd expect from a world capable of supporting complex organisms. Jake felt a familiar mixture of hope and disappointment. They had found dozens of worlds like this during their journey, planets that seemed perfect for life but turned out to be empty of any intelligence. Still, each new discovery brought the possibility that this time might be different. Dr. Carter moved to her own station and began pulling up the detailed sensor data. Her expertise in biology and chemistry made her the best person to determine whether a world was worth a closer look. After several minutes of studying the information, she looked up with an expression that Jake couldn't quite read. "This is definitely a world where intelligent life could exist," she said slowly. "The atmosphere is stable, the climate appears moderate, and there are clear signs of complex ecosystems, but, Amy prompted, "but the energy signatures are all wrong. If there was a technological civilization down there, we should be detecting radio waves, heat signatures from cities, light pollution on the night side of the planet. There's nothing like that. It's as if the world is completely natural, untouched by any kind of advanced life form. Jake had heard this same report so many times that he could recite it from memory. It was the story of humanity's expansion into space. World after world that could support life, but none that actually had produced anything like human civilization. Question that kept him awake at night was simple but terrifying. What if humanity really was alone? What if, out of all the billions of stars in the galaxy, Earth was the only planet where life had managed to evolve beyond simple organisms? The idea seemed impossible, but the evidence was getting harder to ignore. "Set course for the system," Amy ordered. "Even if we don't find little green men, at least we can add another world to our maps." As the Neptune's dawn changed direction and began accelerating toward the distant star system, Jake returned to his position at the window. The stars looked the same as always, distant and silent. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a new thought was beginning to form. What if the galaxy wasn't empty because life was rare? What if it was empty because something had happened to all the other civilizations that had once existed? The idea sent a chill down his spine, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this mystery than simple bad luck. Dr. Carter joined him at the window again, this time carrying a tablet computer loaded with data from their previous explorations. "Jake, I've been thinking about something," she said quietly, so that the others on the bridge couldn't hear. "What if we're looking at this problem the wrong way?" "What do you mean?" "Everyone assumes that if intelligent life exists, it should be easy to detect. Radio signals, industrial pollution, signs of construction and technology. But what if there are civilizations out there that we just can't recognize? What if they communicate in ways we don't understand, or build things we can't detect with our sensors?" Jake considered this possibility. It was true that human technology might not be advanced enough to recognize truly alien intelligence. But that still didn't explain why the galaxy seemed so completely empty of any signs of life beyond the natural ecosystems they found on uninhabited worlds. "There's another possibility," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if something happened to all the other civilizations? What if there's a reason the galaxy is so quiet?" Lisa looked at him with surprise. "You mean like some kind of disaster? Something that wiped out all intelligent life except for us?" "I don't know, but after 6 months of searching and finding nothing, I'm starting to think that the absence of alien life isn't just a coincidence. Maybe there's a reason we seem to be alone out here." The Neptune's dawn continued its journey toward the distant star system, carrying its crew deeper into the mystery that had puzzled humanity for generations. Behind them, the empty space they had already explored stretched back toward Earth, filled with beautiful worlds and silent stars. Ahead lay more of the same, the endless search for answers in a galaxy that seemed determined to keep its secrets. Far beyond the edge of the Milky Way galaxy, in the cold darkness between star systems, a massive space station floated in silence. The station was unlike anything humans had ever built. Its walls were made of a strange blue metal that seemed to glow with its own inner light, and its shape twisted and curved in ways that hurt to look at for too long. Inside the station, Elder Kethvar stood before an enormous holographic display that showed the spiral galaxy in perfect detail. Every star, every planet, every asteroid belt was mapped and cataloged. The display had been updated constantly for over 3,000 years, tracking the movements of everything within that forbidden region of space. Kethvar was old, even by the standards of his people. His skin had the gray-blue color of deep ocean water, and his forearms moved with the careful precision of someone who had lived for many centuries. 2 large black eyes dominated his face, and when he looked at the galaxy display, those eyes held a mixture of fear and curiosity that had been building for generations. The Zephyrian council chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of different species. Some looked almost human, while others were so alien that it was hard to tell which end was their head. They had all gathered for the same reason, to discuss the problem of the Milky Way galaxy. Commander Zithara of the crystalline hegemony stood near the center of the room, her body reflecting the soft light from the holographic display like a living diamond. When she spoke, her voice had the sound of wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but the translation devices allowed everyone to understand her words perfectly. "The situation has not changed in over 1,000 years," she said, gesturing toward the galaxy with one of her crystalline arms. "Our long-range sensors continue to detect activity throughout the spiral arms, but we have maintained our distance as agreed upon by the ancient treaties." Elder Kethver nodded slowly. The treaties she mentioned were older than most of the civilizations represented in the chamber. They had been signed after the Great Fear, when the first exploration fleets had attempted to enter the Milky Way and discovered something that terrified every spacefaring species in the local group of galaxies. A new voice spoke from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. It belonged to Chronicler Venth, one of the ancient record keepers whose job it was to preserve the history of galactic civilization. His species had been exploring space when most others were still learning to make fire, and their memories went back further than anyone else's. "Let me remind you all of why we maintain this vigil," Venth said, his voice carrying the weight of millennia. "It was 4,000 years ago when the first ships attempted to explore that galaxy. The Altarian scientific expedition sent a fleet of 12 vessels to map the outer rim and establish contact with whatever civilization controlled that region of space." The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew this story, but hearing it again always sent chills through the assembled representatives. "Only 3 ships returned," Venth continued. "The survivors spoke of massive structures hidden throughout the galaxy, ancient beyond measure and clearly designed for war. They detected energy signatures that suggested technology far beyond anything we had ever encountered. Most terrifying of all, they found evidence of monitoring stations that had been tracking their approach from the moment they entered the galaxy's gravitational field." Commander Zithara's crystalline form shimmered with nervous energy. "The message was clear," she added. "The galaxy was claimed territory, and trespassers would be eliminated. The few ships that escaped did so only because they turned back immediately when challenged." Elder Kethvar manipulated the holographic display, zooming in on the galaxy's spiral arms. Tiny red dots appeared throughout the structure, marking the locations where the ancient monitoring stations had been detected. There were thousands of them, forming a network that covered every possible approach to the galaxy's interior. "For 4 millennia, we have respected the boundaries established by the ancients," he said. "Trade routes have been redirected around their territory. Exploration fleets mark their space as forbidden. We have built our entire galactic civilization around the simple fact that one region of space is permanently off limits." A new figure stepped forward from the crowd of representatives. This was Captain Zoral of the Void Runners, a species known for their skill in long-distance space travel and their complete lack of fear when it came to exploring dangerous regions. His people had mapped more of the universe than any other species, but even they had never dared to enter the Milky Way. "What if the ancients are gone?" Zoral asked, his mechanical voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the chamber. "Our sensors have detected changes in the energy patterns over the past few centuries. Some of the monitoring stations appear to be operating at reduced capacity. Maybe whatever civilization built that network has finally died out or moved on." The suggestion sent a ripple of excitement and fear through the assembled representatives. The idea that the ancients might no longer be guarding their territory was both thrilling and terrifying. If the galaxy was truly empty, it represented the greatest opportunity for expansion and exploration in galactic history. But if the ancients were still there and simply lying dormant, any attempt to enter their space could trigger a response that might threaten every civilization in the local galaxy group. Elder Kethvar studied the holographic display more carefully, focusing on the areas where energy readings had changed over the past few hundred years. It was true that some of the ancient signatures had weakened or disappeared entirely, but that could mean anything. Perhaps the ancients had simply upgraded their technology to something that current sensors couldn't detect. "There is another possibility," said a soft voice from the back of the chamber. All eyes turned to see Science Officer Veltari of the Altarian Republic step forward. She was young by the standards of her people, with the kind of curiosity that had driven her species to become some of the most accomplished scientists in known space. "What if we're wrong about what we detected 4,000 years ago?" she asked. "What if the ancients weren't as hostile as our ancestors believed? The ships that returned reported being challenged and threatened, but none of them were actually destroyed. Maybe the ancients were simply warning them away rather than preparing to attack." Commander Zithara's crystalline form flickered with disagreement. The energy signatures detected were clearly weapons-grade. The structures found throughout the galaxy were obviously military in nature. Everything about that civilization suggested they were prepared for war on a massive scale. But what if they were defending against something else? Beltari pressed. What if the ancients built those monitoring stations and weapons platforms to protect their galaxy from some other threat? What if they weren't trying to keep us out, but trying to keep something else in? The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives debated this new possibility. The idea that the ancients might have been fighting some kind of war within their own galaxy had never been seriously considered, but it would explain many of the mysteries surrounding their behavior. Elder Kethvar raised one of his forearms for silence. "These questions have no answers as long as we maintain our distance," he said. "The only way to learn the truth about the ancients and their galaxy would be to send an expedition inside their territory." The chamber fell silent again. Everyone understood the implications of such a mission. If the ancients were still active and hostile, any ships that entered their space might never return. But if they were gone, or if they could be reasoned with, the discovery would change everything about galactic civilization. "I propose that we send a small scientific expedition," Veltari said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was suggesting. "Not a military fleet or a large colonization effort, but a single ship with a small crew. Something that would clearly be peaceful in nature, designed to make contact rather than threaten or invade." Captain Zoral stepped forward again. "And who would be foolish enough to volunteer for such a mission?" Veltari looked around the chamber at all the assembled representatives, then turned back to face the holographic display of the Forbidden Galaxy. "I would," she said simply. "My people were the first to encounter the ancients. Perhaps it's time for us to be the first to try understanding them." The debate that followed would continue for months, but the seed of an idea had been planted. After 4,000 years of fear and avoidance, someone was finally ready to discover the truth about the mysterious civilization that had claimed an entire galaxy as their private territory. The alarm on the Neptune's dawn started ringing at exactly 0347 hours ship time. Commander Jake Morrison was pulled from a deep sleep by the urgent sound echoing through the corridors. He rolled out of his bunk, grabbed his uniform jacket, and ran toward the bridge while still pulling it on over his shoulders. Captain Amy Foster was already there when he arrived, standing in front of the main display screen with her arms crossed. Her gray hair was slightly messy from sleep, but her eyes were completely alert. Lieutenant Chris Walker sat at his sensor station, his fingers moving quickly across the controls as streams of data flowed across his screens. "What do we have?" Jake asked, taking his position beside the captain. "Unknown contact," Amy replied without taking her eyes off the main screen. "Chris picked it up about 10 minutes ago. It's definitely artificial, definitely not one of ours, and it's heading straight for us." Jake felt his heart start beating faster. After months of searching empty space for signs of alien life, the possibility that something had finally found them was both exciting and terrifying. "How far out?" Chris looked up from his station. "About 6 hours at current speed. The thing is, Commander, this ship isn't using any kind of propulsion system we recognize. No heat signature from engines, no radiation trail, nothing that suggests how it's moving through space." Dr. Lisa Carter hurried onto the bridge, still wearing her pajamas under a hastily thrown-on lab coat. Her brown hair was sticking up at odd angles, and she was carrying a tablet computer that was already displaying preliminary analysis data. "I've been running calculations based on the sensor readings," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "Whatever that ship is made of, it's not any material we have in our databases. The hull seems to be some kind of crystalline structure, but it's reflecting our sensor beams in ways that don't make sense according to known physics." Amy turned to face the communications station, where Communications Officer Dan Roberts was. working frantically to establish contact with the approaching vessel. Dan was a thin man with red hair and freckles, and he had the kind of nervous energy that seemed to increase whenever something important was happening. "Any luck raising them on standard frequencies?" Amy asked. Dan shook his head. "I've tried everything in our communication protocols. Radio, laser, even basic mathematical sequences that should be universal. Either they can't hear us, or they're choosing not to respond." Jake moved to the navigation station and brought up a tactical display showing the positions of both ships. The alien vessel was moving in a straight line toward them, showing no sign of changing course or slowing down. Its approach was steady and purposeful, as if it knew exactly where it was going. Could this be some kind of automated probe? He asked. Maybe it's programmed to investigate any unusual activity in this region of space. Dr. Carter looked up from her tablet. The energy signatures suggest there are living beings aboard. I'm detecting what appears to be life support systems and possibly some kind of artificial gravity. This isn't a robot ship. The bridge fell silent as everyone considered the implications. If there were living aliens aboard that ship, then humanity was about to experience its first contact with another intelligent species. The moment that scientists and philosophers had been predicting for centuries was finally about to happen. Captain Foster moved to the center of the bridge and settled into her command chair. "All right, people, this is what we trained for. Dan, keep trying to establish communication. Chris, I want continuous sensor sweeps. If that ship so much as twitches in a way you don't like, I want to know about it immediately." "What about weapons?" Jake asked quietly. "Should we go to battle stations?" Amy considered this for a moment. "No. If they wanted to attack us, they probably would have done it already. We're going to assume peaceful intentions until proven otherwise, but make sure all our defensive systems are ready to activate at a moment's notice." The next 4 hours passed slowly. The alien ship continued its steady approach while the crew of the Neptune's Dawn watched and waited. Dr. Carter spent the time analyzing every piece of sensor data she could collect, building a profile of the alien technology that was unlike anything in human experience. Lieutenant Walker reported regular updates on the ship's approach, noting that it had begun to slow down as it got closer. This was encouraging, since it suggested the aliens had some interest in peaceful contact rather than simply ramming into the human vessel. When the alien ship finally came to a complete stop, it was floating just 2 kilometers away from the Neptune's Dawn. On the main screen, it looked like a work of art rather than a spacecraft. The hull was indeed crystalline, as Dr. Carter had predicted, with smooth curves and elegant lines that seemed to flow like frozen water. "It's beautiful," Lisa whispered, staring at the image on the screen. Dan Roberts suddenly straightened in his chair, pressing his headphones tighter against his ears. "Captain, I'm getting something. It's not on any of our standard frequencies, but there's definitely an attempt at communication coming from that ship." "Put it on speakers," Amy ordered. A strange sound filled the bridge like wind chimes mixed with electronic music. It was clearly artificial, but unlike any language or communication system any of them had heard before. The sound continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped. "Can you make any sense of it?" Jake asked. Dan was already working on the problem, running the signal through various translation programs and analysis systems. "It's definitely structured like language. There are patterns and repetitions that suggest meaning, but it's going to take time to figure out what they're trying to say." Suddenly, the alien ship began to change. Sections of its crystalline hull started to glow with soft colors, shifting from blue to green to gold in complex patterns. The light show was mesmerizing, and it was clearly intentional. "They're trying to communicate visually," Dr. Carter said, studying the patterns. "Look at the way the colors are changing. There's definitely a sequence and structure to it." Jake had an idea. "Dan, try responding with our navigation lights. Maybe we can establish some kind of basic communication using light patterns." For the next hour, the 2 ships engaged in a careful exchange of light signals. The humans would flash their lights in simple mathematical sequences, and the aliens would respond with their own colorful patterns. Gradually, a basic form of communication began to emerge. Dr. Carter worked with Dan to decode the meaning behind the alien signals. "I think they're trying to tell us that they come in peace," she said. "The patterns seem to repeat certain sequences whenever we send friendly signals." Then something unexpected happened. The alien ship began transmitting on one of the standard human communication frequencies, and the voice that came through the speakers was speaking perfect English. "Human vessel. This is Science Officer Veltari of the exploration ship Crystal. Wind. We apologize for the delay in establishing proper communication. Our translation systems required time to analyze your language patterns." The bridge of the Neptune's dawn fell completely silent. Everyone stared at the speakers as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Captain Foster was the first to recover. "This is Captain Amy Foster of the research vessel Neptune's Dawn. Welcome to human space, Science Officer Veltari. This is humanity's first contact with an alien species." There was a pause before Veltari responded, and when she did, her voice carried a note of confusion. "Human space? Captain Foster, our records indicate that this region of the galaxy is controlled by the ancients. We expected to encounter their representatives, not an unknown species." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "Science Officer Veltari, we have no knowledge of any ancients in this region. Humans have been exploring this part of the galaxy for over 200 years, and we have found no evidence of any other intelligent species." Another long pause. "Captain Foster, may I request permission to come aboard your vessel? I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding that requires immediate discussion. The implications of what you have told me could change everything we thought we knew about this galaxy." Amy looked around the bridge at her crew, seeing excitement and nervousness in equal measure on their faces. "Permission granted, Science Officer Veltari. We look forward to meeting you." As they prepared for humanity's first face-to-face encounter with an alien being, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting was going to reveal secrets about the galaxy that would change everything about humanity's place in the universe. Science Officer Veltari stepped through the airlock of the Neptune's Dawn with the grace of someone who had spent most of her life in zero gravity. She was tall and slender, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly under the ship's lights. Her large dark eyes took in everything around her with obvious curiosity, and when she smiled, it was with an expression that looked surprisingly human, despite her alien features. Commander Jake Morrison stood with Captain Amy Foster and Dr. Lisa Carter in the main corridor, waiting to greet humanity's first alien visitor. The moment felt historic but also strangely normal. Veltari looked so much like a human that it was easy to forget she came from another world entirely. "Welcome aboard the Neptune's Dawn," Amy said, extending her hand in the traditional human greeting. Veltari looked at the offered hand for a moment, then reached out and grasped it firmly. "Thank you for allowing me to visit your ship, Captain Foster. Your species has customs that are remarkably similar to our own." Dr. Carter stepped forward, barely able to contain her excitement. "Science Officer Veltari, I have about 1,000 questions I'd like to ask you about your people and your technology. But first, could you explain what you meant when you mentioned the ancients?" Veltari's expression grew serious. "Perhaps we should discuss this in a more private setting. What I have to tell you may be difficult to accept, and it concerns the safety of both our species." They moved to the ship's main conference room, where the senior staff had gathered around a large table. Lieutenant Chris Walker was there, along with Communications Officer Dan Roberts and Chief Engineer Pete Collins. Everyone looked nervous but excited to be part of this historic first contact. Veltari settled into a chair that had been adjusted to accommodate her taller frame. She folded her hands on the table and looked around at the assembled humans with an expression that mixed wonder and concern. "For over 4,000 years, my people and dozens of other species have avoided this galaxy," she began. "We were taught that it was controlled by an ancient and powerful civilization that did not welcome visitors. Our exploration fleets detected massive defensive structures throughout the spiral arms, along with monitoring stations that tracked any ship that approached the galactic boundary." Jake felt a cold sensation in his stomach. "Are you saying that other alien civilizations have been staying away from the Milky Way because they thought it was already occupied?" Exactly, Veltari replied. The energy signatures we detected suggested technology far beyond anything our species had achieved. The few ships that attempted to enter this galaxy reported being challenged by automated systems that clearly belonged to a military network of incredible size and sophistication. Dr. Carter leaned forward in her chair. But we've never encountered anything like that. Humans have been exploring this galaxy for centuries, and we've found no signs of any advanced alien civilization. That is precisely why I requested this meeting, Veltari said. If humans have been living and exploring freely throughout this galaxy, then either the ancients have died out or what? Amy asked. Or we were wrong about what we detected all those years ago. Chief Engineer Pete Collins, who had been quietly listening to the conversation, suddenly spoke up. What if these defensive systems you detected are still here, but they're just not working the way they used to? What if they're automated systems that have been running for thousands of years without any living beings to control them? Veltari's dark eyes widened with interest. That is an intriguing possibility. If the ancients died out long ago, their automated defenses might still be operating, but perhaps not at full capacity. Dr. Carter was already pulling up star charts on her tablet computer. Science Officer Veltari, could you show us where your people detected these ancient monitoring stations? If they're still out there, our sensors should be able to find them. Working together, the human and alien scientists began comparing their respective star charts and sensor data. What they discovered was startling. Many of the locations where Veltari's people had detected ancient structures matched up with regions of space that human explorers had simply avoided because of unusual energy readings or navigation hazards. We always assumed these were natural phenomena, Jake said, studying the overlapping data. Strange radiation fields, gravitational anomalies, areas where our instruments didn't work properly. We just marked them as dangerous and went around them. Those are exactly the kinds of signatures that would be produced by ancient monitoring stations, Veltari explained. The technology is so old that it's probably malfunctioning, creating interference instead of clear signals. Captain. Foster stood up from the table and began pacing around the room. If this is true, then we need to investigate one of these sites immediately. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Dr. Carter was already plotting courses to the nearest suspected location. There's an area about 12 light years from here that matches the profile perfectly. We've always avoided it because of unusual subspace distortions, but if it's actually an ancient monitoring station, then we need to go there and find out what's really been watching over this galaxy, Amy finished. 3 days later, the Neptune's dawn approached the coordinates that Dr. Carter had identified. The Crystal Wind, Veltari's ship, traveled alongside them, its crystalline hull gleaming in the light of nearby stars. Both crews worked together, sharing sensor data and analysis as they approached what might be humanity's first encounter with truly ancient alien technology. Lieutenant Walker was the first to detect the structure. Captain, I'm picking up something. Big on long-range sensors, it's artificial. Definitely not a natural formation. The main screen displayed what they found. A massive space station unlike anything in human or Altarian databases. It was clearly ancient, with a design that seemed to have been built for function rather than beauty. Sections of the station were dark and obviously non-functional, but other parts still glowed with the faint energy signatures that had kept other species away for millennia. My God, Lisa whispered. It's huge. That thing must be 30 kilometers long. Veltari, who was present on the human bridge as part of the joint investigation, studied the structure with obvious fascination. The design is completely unknown to our databases. This predates any civilization we have records of. Chief Engineer Collins ran detailed scans of the station's power systems. Most of it appears to be shut down, but there are still active sections. The power source is something I've never seen before. It's been running continuously for what must be thousands of years. As they moved closer to the ancient station, automated systems suddenly activated. Warning signals began broadcasting on multiple frequencies, and the station's remaining weapon systems powered up and targeted both ships. Defensive stations activated, Chris reported, his voice tight with tension. We're being scanned and targeted by weapons that are still functional. But then something unexpected happened. The weapons powered down and the warning signal stopped. In their place, a new signal began broadcasting, a simple mathematical sequence that was clearly meant as a greeting rather than a threat. "It's trying to communicate with us," Dan Roberts said, monitoring the transmissions. "The signal pattern is similar to what we used when we first made contact with the crystal wind." Dr. Carter was studying the station's behavior with growing excitement. "I think I understand what's happening. This station has been programmed to challenge any approaching ships, but it's also designed to recognize friendly contact. When we responded peacefully instead of aggressively, it switched from defense mode to communication mode. Over the next several hours, the joint human-Altarian team worked to decode the station's databases. What they found was a revelation that changed everything they thought they knew about the galaxy. The station's records went back millions of years to a civilization called the progenitors, who had once ruled the entire Milky Way. But the progenitors were long dead, victims of some ancient catastrophe that had wiped them out completely. The monitoring stations and defensive networks that had frightened other species were nothing but automated caretakers, left behind to maintain an empty realm. "The galaxy has been waiting," Dr. Carter said, staring at the ancient data flowing across her screens. "All this time it's been waiting for someone new to claim it. The progenitor systems weren't meant to keep everyone out forever. They were meant to keep the galaxy safe until someone worthy came along to inherit it." Jake looked out at the stars surrounding the ancient station, seeing them with completely new eyes. "And we were the first species brave enough, or maybe foolish, enough to ignore the warnings and make ourselves at home. The discovery would change everything about humanity's relationship with the galaxy, and with the community of alien species that had been waiting beyond its borders for thousands of years." 6 months after the discovery of the progenitor station, Commander Jake Morrison found himself standing in what had once been an empty conference room aboard Earth's newest space station. Now the room was filled with beings from a dozen different worlds, all talking at once in languages that ranged from musical chimes to electronic buzzes. The universal translation devices worked overtime to keep everyone's words understandable to each other. Jake wore a new uniform with insignia he still wasn't used to. Galactic Liaison Officer for the Human Colonial Authority. It was a job that hadn't existed a year ago, created specifically to handle the flood of alien contact requests that had poured in after news of the progenitor discovery spread throughout the galactic community. Captain Amy Foster sat at the head of the long conference table, reviewing the daily reports from human colonies throughout the Milky Way. What had once been a simple matter of managing human settlements had become incredibly complex as alien species began requesting permission to establish their own colonies within what they now understood to be humanity's territory. "The crystalline hegemony wants to establish a research station in the Vega system," Amy reported, reading from her tablet. "They're particularly interested in studying the unique mineral formations on Vega 3. The Altarian Republic is requesting permission to build a permanent embassy on Luna, and the Ethereal Collective wants to set up some kind of energy research facility in deep space near Jupiter." Dr. Lisa Carter looked up from her own stack of reports, her brown hair now streaked with gray from the stress of the past few months. She had been promoted to Director of Xenobiology and was responsible for coordinating scientific exchanges with all the alien species that wanted to work with human researchers. "The scientific cooperation requests are even more overwhelming," she said. "Every species we've made contact with wants to share their research and learn about human discoveries. The chroniclers alone have offered to give us access to historical records going back over 1,000,000 years." Science Officer Veltari, who had become humanity's first official alien resident, entered the conference room carrying a stack of data, tablets. Over the past months, she had served as a bridge between human and alien cultures, helping to establish the protocols that would govern the new galactic community. "The situation beyond the galactic rim is becoming quite complex," she reported, settling into her usual chair. "Elder Kethavar sends word that over 60 different species have requested permission to send expeditions into the Milky Way. Some want to establish colonies, others want to conduct research, and a few are simply curious about the species that inherited the progenitor's realm. Lieutenant Chris Walker, now promoted to Navigation Coordinator for Interspecies Affairs, was working with a holographic display that showed ship movements throughout the galaxy. Red dots represented human vessels, while blue, green, and gold dots showed the locations of various alien ships that had been granted permission to enter human space. "Traffic control is becoming a nightmare," he said, manipulating the display to show the most congested areas. "We have Altarian science ships working alongside human research vessels in the Tau Ceti system, crystalline traders setting up shop in the asteroid belts around Alpha Centauri, and ethereal energy collectors harvesting solar radiation from a dozen different stars." The transformation had been remarkable and sometimes overwhelming. What started as humanity's lonely expansion into an empty galaxy had become the center of the most diverse community of intelligent species anyone had ever imagined. Species that had avoided each other for centuries were now working together on joint projects, sharing technology and knowledge in ways that benefited everyone. Chief Engineer Pete Collins had perhaps benefited the most from the new situation. His workshop was now filled with alien technologies that he was learning to understand and adapt for human use. The crystalline hegemony had shared the secrets of their nearly indestructible hull materials, while the Altarians had provided new power sources that were far more efficient than anything humans had developed. "The technology exchanges are producing incredible results," Pete reported during the morning briefing. "The new hybrid engines we've developed using Altarian power cores and crystalline focusing crystals are 3 times more efficient than our old systems. And the ethereals have taught us how to manipulate gravity fields in ways we never thought possible." But the changes weren't limited to technology. Human culture itself was evolving as people learned about the rich diversity of alien civilizations that had been waiting just beyond their reach. Artists worked with alien counterparts to create new forms of music and visual art. Philosophers debated the implications of consciousness and intelligence across dozens of different species. Children in human schools learned alien languages, alongside mathematics and science. Communications Officer Dan Roberts had become the head of the new Department of Interspecies Communication, responsible for maintaining contact with the growing network of alien civilizations. His office walls were covered with star charts showing communication relay stations that now connected the Milky Way with the broader galactic community. "We're receiving over 1,000 messages per day from species throughout the local galaxy group," Dan reported. "Trade proposals, scientific collaboration requests, cultural exchange programs, and diplomatic communications. The volume is growing so fast that we're having trouble keeping up." The most significant change, however, was in humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. No longer were they alone in an empty galaxy, searching desperately for signs of other intelligent life. Instead, they had become the inheritors of an ancient legacy and the hosts of a new golden age of cooperation between species. Elder Kethvar had arrived at the space station earlier that week, leading the first official diplomatic mission from the Zephyrian Council. His 4-armed form moved gracefully through the corridors designed for human proportions, and his ancient eyes held a mixture of wonder and respect when he looked at the humans around him. "Your species has accomplished something remarkable," he told Jake during one of their private conversations. "In less than a year, you have transformed from an unknown civilization into the foundation of a new galactic community. The way you have welcomed other species into your territory shows a wisdom that many older civilizations lack." Jake often found himself thinking about the irony of the situation. Humanity had spent centuries believing they were alone in the universe, when in reality, they had been surrounded by thousands of alien civilizations. The only thing that had kept them isolated was an ancient fear based on misunderstood technology. The progenitor stations throughout the galaxy had been gradually reactivated and converted into communication relays and meeting points for the various species. What had once been a network of defensive installations had become the backbone of a new form of galactic civilization. Dr. Carter's research teams, working with alien scientists, had made breakthrough discoveries about the progenitors themselves. The ancient race had apparently fled to the Milky Way from some cosmic disaster in a distant part of the universe. They had built their defensive networks not to keep other species out, but to protect themselves from whatever had destroyed their original home. The progenitors were refugees, Lisa explained during one of her presentations to the Joint Council. They came here seeking safety, and when they eventually died out naturally, they left behind systems designed to protect the galaxy until someone else could claim it. In a way, they were preparing the Milky Way to become exactly what it has. Become a safe haven for multiple species working together. As Jake looked around the conference room at the diverse group of beings working together to solve the challenges of building a galactic community, he realized that humanity's greatest discovery hadn't been new technology or ancient secrets. It had been the discovery that they were part of something much larger and more wonderful than they had ever imagined. The galaxy that had once seemed empty and lonely was now full of friends, partners, and fellow explorers. The silence that had puzzled scientists for centuries had been replaced by the constant chatter of 1,000 different voices, all working together to build something greater than any single species could achieve alone. The Milky Way had become home to them all,